I have not had a chance to really talk to her in a long time. Cynthia Lummis finally sitting in the studio with me, and it's a face-to-face. It's been a couple of years.
It has been, Glenn.
Yeah.
It's great to see you again.
Great to see you. Why? First off, why are you in Casper? Is it the campaign?
I am in Casper because of the campaign.
Okay.
Once I decided to run, even though it's early, I wanted to get out and start talking to people again, listen to what's current on their minds.
Okay. So let's talk about, because for how many years were you in the House of Representatives?
I was in for 8 years, 4 terms.
And then you retired yourself from there based on what was your reasoning for stepping aside? Because some people, it's 25 years, they're still going.
Mm-hmm. I'm good in a job for a period of time. And when I start sensing that my passion for it is beginning to wane, I think it's better for someone else to step in. And my terms in Congress coincided with those of Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. And I am now looking forward to the opportunity to serve in the United States Senate alongside President Trump, because I'm very confident that he's going to be reelected. Okay,
so this time deciding that I'm ready to get back into the passion for politics, passion for what's happening right now. I mean, what's the catalyst that says, that's it, I got to get into this fight?
The spending is a big factor. I am a fiscal conservative. Yeah. When I arrived in Congress at the beginning of Barack Obama's tenure as president, the national debt was $10 trillion. Mm-hmm. And now that looks so small.
It does. 22
going on 23.
Yeah.
And the fact that both parties have put that issue on the back burner causes me tremendous concern.
Just signed another budget deal, both parties did, that will add almost $2 trillion more within just the next couple of years.
It will indeed. And my only positive spin on that is this. I am very confident that when President Trump is reelected, he will, mark my words, turn Mick Mulvaney loose on that budget. And they will begin to reduce the size of the federal government. They will begin to reduce spending. President Trump has been under attack from the minute he was declared the winner of the 2016 election. The Mueller report, the impeachment talk, the accusations, the collusion with Russia stuff. He has had to fight that off the entire time that he has been president. And there are certain issues. You have to pick your battles, as you know, Glenn. Mm. And he has positioned himself for re-election with this budget deal. Now, fiscal conservatives cringed. A lot of fiscal conservatives voted no. I would have voted no. But I understand why the president did this. I truly believe that in the second term, we'll see a smaller federal government. We'll see power redistributed to the states. You're already seeing it, Glenn, with the Bureau of Land Management. Mm-hmm. It's being moved from Washington, D.C. to western Colorado. The employees that are in Washington are being put out into the state BLM offices. The main office will be in western Colorado, which is still in the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals.
The guy who's running the BLM has Wyoming roots.
Perry Pendley.
Yeah.
And he is a strong advocate for multiple use of public lands. He was a very good person to tap to make this transition.
Okay, so I do see during the Trump administration he has at least pulled back on regulations. That I give him. And getting government out of the way, of course, even making our tax structure a little bit easier to deal with. Of course, we have a boom in the economy, more great economic numbers coming out, so that's all very good. But when you get to Washington, D.C., when it comes to actually cutting spending, remember the whole sequestration thing we went through?
Yes.
Dear Lord, we weren't even talking about a percentage cut there, and the squealing that went on from both parties. So I'm not so much interested in Democrat versus Republican. I take a look at establishment, and I include the bureaucracy in there. How do you get decades, generations even worth, to take the smallest little cut?
Yeah, you are spot on. The problem is establishment people. It's people who think a reduction in a proposed increase really is a cut. And I supported the Budget Control Act, which was John Boehner's attempt to put a ceiling on spending caps. And at the time, John Boehner was very realistic. He says, we're going to try this at some point. They're going to blow through the caps because Congress can't resist it. And he was right. And in the most recent budget deal that passed the Senate yesterday, they blew through the caps. And it is tremendously irresponsible. But it does strategically something for the president. It gets this issue, the possibility of government shutdown, off the table. Then after the election, even in his tweet, he gave us an idea that there's time for cuts in the future. And I really believe that there will be cuts in the second term of President Trump.
So how then do you make that happen? Because, again, it's not just fighting old establishment. And you met them, you had to work with them.
I did.
It's fighting old bureaucracy that's been there for such a long time. What's the strategy to actually get them to do it? Is it the court of public opinion? How do you do it?
You know, it's very clear that the leadership on that has to come from the White House. Congress doesn't do it, can't do it, is resistant to doing it. But if the White House itself trims budgets from within, and doesn't spend and directs that federal agencies not spend all the money that was appropriated to them, we can begin to make it stick.
Well, you know what you're going to hear. You know this is coming. Spending cuts are racist.
Oh, yes.
Obviously.
And there's environmental racism and economic racism.
Isn't that hysterical?
Oh, my gosh. When Elizabeth Warren was talking about that the other night, I thought, what is environmental racism?
You just put racism at the end of anything, and therefore it is Trump's fault, and you can blame him for a racism of some kind. So there's just another tactic.
And, of course, Glenn, building the wall is racist.
Okay, let's talk about building the wall, because that's something that you're in favor. And so far, there's been a big fight on getting funding. Congress won't give the funding, obviously. He's not going to get the funding through Congress. So how do you get the funding to build a wall?
Well, he recently had a very favorable court decision to move money from the Department of Defense budget to what's called MILCON, or military construction budget. And that should give him at least $3 billion to keep the construction going on. So that was a very, very positive result. And it's going to require having that court decision stick, which would allow money to be moved over to military construction for the purpose of building a wall.
Okay, so build the wall. Here's one of my first, you've heard me complain about this. Get government to build a project, and it costs way too much money, and it takes way too much time to get it done. So I see a decade from now, they still haven't got it done, and they're way over budget, and what they have built has been falling apart. That's my concern.
There's a project in Central Park that New York City started, and multiple contractors tried to build it. They were always over budget, and they never got it done.
Is that the skating rink?
It is.
Yeah.
President Trump came in when he was in the private sector. He bought it. He brought it in on time and under budget in a big way. So he knows how to do it, and he loves things like that. He loves projects that are a challenge that he can bring in a expeditious manner and under budget. And I think the wall is going to be his skating rink. When he was in the private sector, it was skating rink. In government, it's going to be a wall. I think that's what he's going to do.
8:21 is the time. Temperatures firmly in the 60s across the region. Partly cloudy skies. Cynthia Lummis in the studio with me. She's running for Senate this time around. She and I were just talking about getting a staff and going across the state to campaign. And you start. You don't have to start small. I mean, you could go ahead and get a whole staff and do the whole thing as big as you want to do it. But what? It's just you and one person right now?
That's correct, and I'm driving myself around the state. The nice thing about starting early is I have the time to actually spend with people and do deep dives into conversations.
Okay.
I don't have to do those run into a room, shake as many hands as you can, and go to the next town. And a year from now, that will be the case because we'll just be weeks away from the primary election. But one of the really fun things about starting early is it feels more like going on a vacation and connecting with old friends and sitting down and having a cup of coffee and lingering over a conversation. So it's just been fun so far.
Okay, so speaking of conversation, you willing to take some calls?
I'd love to.
Okay, now the lady Alex is away on business. Normally she's screening the calls, but I can go ahead and take them directly. So 888-97-WOODS, that's 888-97 WOODS if you have any questions for Cynthia Lummis. The conversation, I like the idea that you can take the time and talk to people because, as you know, so many politicians have those scripted, usually tested answers that they give people. And from my perspective as the host, as I try to talk to someone, it's just annoying to ask a question and get that cookie cutter answer, every single time. So by the way, I'd throw in this. As you're driving across the state, have you ever seen it this green?
No,
this time of year?
Not this time of year.
Yeah, and the flowers are still out there. Okay, so you've been so far. Where?
Gillette, Sundance, Sheridan.
Right.
And in Casper today.
Okay.
And next week I'll be on the western side of the state and then back over on the eastern side.
Okay, so let's talk Gillette real quick. So we have some problems in coal country again.
Absolutely.
And I understand that a lot of this is private sector stuff. I interviewed the governor about this, and there's only so much government can do. But from a Senate perspective, there was, despite their denials, a war on coal. Came from the EPA, came from the Obama administration. So in that seat, what do you do to help?
The regulations during the Obama administration caused utilities to prematurely turn away from coal-fired power to natural gas or other sources. President Trump has relaxed some of those regulations that were so extreme, regulation without improvement to the air. But it was too late. Those companies plan 5, 10, 15, 20 years out what they're going to do and where they're going to put their capital. So, wisely, some of the private sector companies and the city of Gillette and the county of Campbell are putting money into two things. One is testing carbon capture and sequestration. Now, at the Dry Creek plant, that really clean coal-fired power plant that was just dedicated a few years back, there are 6 modules that will allow experimental technologies to plug into their emissions system and experiment with capturing carbon.
Here's been my complaint about that. First off, CO2 is not a pollutant. We're a dead planet without it. So to capture it, I think first off is a waste. Second, private sector companies already experiment as it is. I mean, when I was a kid, I had a CO2 pistol. I mean, the CO2 is used for all sorts of things anyway. Aren't there already private sector companies coming up with uses for this anyway? Are we spending taxpayer money for something the private sector is already doing?
We in Wyoming are very good at using emissions to, for example, stimulate additional oil and gas production,
right,
and other technologies. But this is truly capturing what would otherwise go into the air. And Glenn, you and I can say all day long that mankind has a minuscule effect on the climate change that is occurring. We can say all day long that carbon is natural, and people have been raised to believe at this point that there's no such thing as clean coal, which is a total lie, but they believe it. And so sometimes you have to deal with what people believe rather than fight it and try to
I choose to fight it. But okay,
good.
We'll disagree on that. Let's
Okay.
go to this then.
Okay.
Washington State. I know that the state of Wyoming is getting into a lawsuit because you would think because of our Constitution, interstate commerce rules, we can ship coal out of the country and use Washington State to do it. So again, you're in that Senate seat. Can you help us out?
Yeah, I actually believe that this is a violation of the Interstate Commerce Clause for the state of Washington to be interfering with the transport of Wyoming coal over to the Pacific Rim, specifically China. So I think the lawsuit needs to go forward. As you know, lawsuits move really slowly, but it's worth putting the pressure on them because I believe they're legally on extremely shaky ground. That said, they're cutting off their noses to spite their face because the coal that is being burned in China is high sulfur coal. They're buying it from sources nearby, Australia, for example. And then that air current is bringing that high sulfur pollutants back to the West Coast, and they can prove it. They have the data to show that that's what's happening. It would be so much better for the West Coast environment for China to be burning Wyoming coal, which is very low sulfur.
Okay, so we somehow or other have to either convince them or convince the courts to be able to get through to those ports over there. So would we just wait for the lawsuits to happen, or is there anything that the Senate can do?
I think we need to put pressure on Oregon and Washington. I served in Congress with Jay Inslee, who is currently the governor of Washington.
Yeah.
I think I think it would take a lawsuit to jar Jay Inslee loose, but we ought to be visiting with Oregon strongly. You know, the port of Oregon, the port of Portland, Oregon. We ship all of our Trona to the Pacific Rim through there. And that is the largest export that goes through the Portland port. So it employs so many union workers at the Port of Portland. It employs the railroad workers that are taking the Trona to the port. My gosh, they should be taking our coal too.
Grab your headphones real quick. We've got to make this a quick one because we're coming up on who's on the line with us.
This is Barney, Glenn. How you doing?
Good, sir. What you got?
Well, to the lady that's running for Senate, I'm sorry I didn't get your name
Cynthia
on that.
Lummis.
Colorado.
Cynthia Lummis.
Cynthia, let me give you advice. We have a guy named Cory Gardner in Colorado, and we're pretty sure he's going to lose. He lost the base. He shows up for interview with questions that are already wrote. My advice to you is be real. And by the way, the coal mine up in Gillette, those problems were long before Obama. That place, Black Thunder or whatever they were, I think they had several deaths. They were sued for those.
Okay, I got to run into the news break here. Let's talk about that in just a moment. Thanks for calling in. I appreciate it. There's a Colorado call for you. 8:36 is the time. My name is Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining me. My guest is Cynthia Lummis. She's running for the Senate this time around after a break of how many years did you take off, by the way? I lost track of how many years you're away.
I left in January 17.
Okay. So just a couple of years of a sabbatical and you're good, but you kept busy.
I did.
Okay.
I've spent the whole time in Wyoming. I've only been back to Washington, D.C. once since I left, and that was to visit the Oval Office and President Trump.
So you had to detox, in other words. Yeah, kind of. There was a caller that was trying to hang on through the break, but you did make it. If you want to try back, now's a good time. If you have any questions for Cynthia Lummis, 888-97-WOODS. That's 888-97-WOODS. Let's talk one of my big pet peeves, regulations. We've had this conversation before. I have with anyone who holds any kind of office where they get to make law. Mm-hmm. Congress today writes not a law but an outline. They hand the outline to the bureaucracy and say, here, write the rules, which are laws, to make this happen. Then you have these people who sit there all day long in their little cubicles just adding page after page after page until by the end of the year there's boxes of laws and there's no way anybody can keep up with it, and it's extraordinarily expensive. So I know the Trump administration has been working on that. I would love, if you got into the Senate, for you to work on the Senate. Can we quit writing outlines and actually write laws, and the bureaucracy is just there to enforce what we passed? Any chance? Excellent
idea. I stood by 10 feet high of thin onion skin paper that constituted 1 year's worth of new regulations during the Obama administration.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is absolutely true. Congress has to reassert itself because it is handing off its obligation to legislate on behalf of the American people when it gives the whole football of regulation to the executive branch by way of outline legislation like you described. That is what's happening.
Okay, so I do have some politicians that will actually argue with me, oh, no, we have to do it that way, and yet that's not even constitutional. If you think about it, the biggest one, the most egregious one to me were two. EPA declared CO2 a pollutant and then regulated it.
Yes.
And then the FCC declared the internet a utility and then began to write law. And it took Congress couldn't figure out how to get rid of it, but it took the Trump administration. Trump came along and just said no and threw it out.
It really is quite remarkable how quickly President Trump and his early skeleton crew of Senate-confirmed appointees began to stop and repeal a lot of the regulations
and
that were coming
overreach
around.
For that matter.
Yeah, the overreach was unreal.
Grab your headphones. We have a caller. This is Glenn. You're on with Cynthia Lummis. What's your question? Are you there?
Glenn, I'm here.
Okay, what you got for me?
This is Scott up in Gillette.
Yes, sir.
So, my question for Cynthia is, what are you going to do to stop Congress and the House and Senate from getting pay raises if we're supposed to be cutting the budget and not giving military pay raises?
Okay, that's actually interesting. I'm going to follow up on this because at first, pay raises were something that Congress had to vote on. Then for a while, they changed the rules that they would have to vote to not get the raise because it was automatic. Mm-hmm. Then something, last I heard, went into effect that they're not getting any pay raises unless they change that, and I didn't hear. Do you know what the latest on that is?
Yeah, the pay that members of the House and Senate get is exactly the same amount as it was when I first started in Congress. In other words, when I first got there in 2009, they froze their own pay and have continued. It has been frozen since 2009 at the same level. Okay. So Congress is being responsible with regard to the fact that it should share in the pain when it creates problems for the American people.
Having said that, though, special interest money, all-time high. I mean, somehow these people walk away millionaires when they're done.
I don't know how they do it, Glenn, because I never found, when I was there, it's not like I was looking for an avenue to make money, but I was figuring out how other people found avenues to make money, and I never figured it out.
Okay, so now when it comes to your campaign then, your own money, you're raising money, where's the money coming from to run your own campaign?
Both.
Both, okay.
Of course, when you start out, you're seeding your own campaign.
Okay.
I'm also raising money, and raising it both online and in person. I'll be making a lot of phone calls between now and December.
Well, and this goes back to, this actually was kind of it's a delightful surprise for me, Cynthia. It really is. That you do have the ability to staff up and you have the connections to get big money now. But it's you and one other person and you're driving around by yourself.
Well, that's the beauty of Wyoming.
Yeah.
This state is so unique. People will have an opportunity, even people of modest means really still do have an opportunity to gain elected office without bankrupting themselves. And we just want to keep it that way. We want to hang on to that. The last governor's race was extremely expensive, but I hope that doesn't become the norm.
Okay. I'm going to have to run because of news time. Where do people find you? I know you're online, and where are you appearing next?
Yeah, LummisForWyoming.com is online, and heading for Western Wyoming next week And then I'll probably be alternating a lot between eastern Wyoming and western Wyoming. I'm blessed that I have some ag land in Star Valley, so I get to go over there and stay in my own house on the western side as well as on the eastern side, and I'll just be going back and forth throughout the fall. So I really look forward to visiting with more people in this very calm, friendly atmosphere before the fireworks start.
Yeah, before you get back to, talk about fireworks again. That's why you spent 2 years detoxing. It's great to see you again.
Great to see you. Thank you.